Okay, good afternoon. We are live. We're going to give it a few minutes for people to log on. All right, good afternoon. I'm Steve Mazzacane. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. It is 4 o'clock on Thursday, November 19th. Our sponsor today is Hornets Nest Deli. We'll put that down on the screen as well. The reason they are the sponsor is to many people in the area, in Brantford area, know that during COVID, when it first started, they started a dinner program. And they did that at $10 a dinner to help the public and what have you. They're bringing that back just prior to Thanksgiving because there's been a lot of requests to do so. And so we'll have more information on Brantford 7 about that. We work with Hornets Nest, so they are sponsoring the podcast today. And we want you to aware of that dinner program. So we'll put the menu out later on tonight or tomorrow. And then the day before Thanksgiving, if you're looking for dinners, they'll be available. And then afterwards, on a nightly basis, how it works is you place your order before 3 and just pick it up before 6. It's $10 for every meal. They are huge. It's an amazing value, and we're happy to have them as one of our partners. Okay, so our guest today is going to be Sean Scanlon. We'll bring him on in a second. As many of you know, he was just named the chair of, I would say, probably the most powerful, when it comes to money anyway, committee in Hartford. And we'll talk about Tweed. We'll talk about a few more things. Give me 1 second. We'll bring him on, and we'll talk to him. Sean, can you hear me?
Hey, Steve.
How are you, Sean? Good to see you. Most importantly, we have to follow up on our conversation from about 3 weeks ago or a month ago. How far along on Yellowstone are you?
I am on, I think, episode 3 of season 2. So
okay.
I did keep my promise to you. I did make it through season 1 through election day, and I know you made your promise to me, which is to do season 1 of The Wire. So we're even. But yeah, I still like Yellowstone a lot.
I do. I started season 2, and basically, like you said, I couldn't really get into it. I'm going to skip to season 3, but I'll do that when I get some time to do so. But yeah, every list I saw was that The Wire was like the greatest show in the history of mankind. I just had never really watched it. So
I think it is. That and Sopranos, I think, are the 2 best shows of all time.
All right. I like Sopranos. I don't know if I would say it best of all time, but the great thing about Sopranos is it's incredibly rewatchable. You can watch any episode of Sopranos and it's still good.
Very true.
Let's move on to things that are a little more, on topic. The most important one is congratulations on your appointment to
Thank you.
The chair of the Revenue and Bonding Committee. And you replace, I don't know who you replaced, but we had Pat Withletts in that seat in the past. It's an incredible, I think, benefit to the area to have someone locally in that position. Talk about that position. Primarily, what are the responsibilities of that committee?
Yeah, well, so it's not something I ever thought that I would be doing, especially not 6 years into my career. You mentioned Pat, who I succeeded. She served for 20 years, and she didn't chair that committee until she had been there for 16 years. So usually it's reserved for somebody who's a little more senior in the legislature. But I lucked out in the sense that a very good friend of mine, Matt Ritter, became the Speaker of the House, and he wanted somebody in that job that he could trust and knew well, and he offered it to me. And I, again, never expected to chair that committee, certainly didn't expect to chair it at this point in my career, and was a little reluctant to do that because it's a big committee, and it can be a controversial committee. Obviously, it deals with something that there's nothing more controversial than the economy and taxes. So I did hesitate a little bit, to be honest with you and your listeners, but at the end of the day, I decided to take it because in my career in Hartford in 6 years, I have, I think, made good on my promise to work across the aisle and made good on my promise to treat everybody with respect and fairness, regardless of whether I agree with them or not. And I think that one of the reasons why Matt chose to give this job to me is because he knows that I'll do that in this role. And with Vinnie Candelora, who's a very good friend of mine, who's now the head Republican in the legislature, I think that I will be able to do what I've been able to do and take on some tougher issues and a bigger platform but continue to be the same person that I have been, and we'll see if that works out.
I mean, traditionally, Republicans have been kind of a line in the sand thing on any new taxes. You may get along with great, and Vin Candelora is a great guy, but do you see there's going to be any sort of give on that?
I do, because I think that the parties are realigning. I think that in the last 4 to 6 years, Trump did not cause this, but he certainly helped accelerate it. There has been a rapid realignment. We see that in Brantford, right? Towns that used to be Democratic in nature, that are more blue collar and working class, are switching to Republican, and towns that are more affluent, which used to be Republican, are switching to Democrat. And so the bases of both parties right now, I think, are aligned against elites, because we have on one side populism on the right with Trump, and one side populism on the left with Bernie Sanders. I think that it could be an interesting moment for us to look at tax reform. And I think some of the traditional sort of Democrat versus Republican positions of tax the rich versus don't necessarily line up the way that it used to line up. And so I think that it'd be very interesting, and I am going to try to see if there is a way to rewrite our tax code, because I think that it should be fairer for the middle class and the working class, families like the one that I grew up in. And I think that there might be a way to do that in tandem with the Republicans, given the way their party base is shifting.
Okay, so it may not be necessarily raise more money through taxes. It may be taxed in a different manner.
Correct. Yeah. If you look at in 2014, one of the things that I have been paying a lot of attention to is in 2014, the state version of the IRS, it's called DRS. They did what's called the tax incidence study, and they do it every few years. And what the study showed was that people who are either middle class or working class actually pay more in taxes than people who are rich. That's not a surprise to anybody who's watching this, because that's been happening all along. People who are more affluent have good accountants that help them get around these different laws. But when you have a tax incidence study that shows that middle class families are paying more than the people at the top, it's only natural for you to wonder whether there's a way to change that. And I want to explore a way to change that doesn't necessarily simply go after those at the top, because we have to be very careful about doing that given the precarious position that we're in Connecticut, with some of our highest earners dictating a lot of what happens, whether we go up or down with our revenue collection. But there may be a way to do that and tweak those numbers at the top a little bit to offset some of the numbers for guys in the middle. And those are the folks that I really want to go to bat for in this new job. And my job, to answer your question, the first one, any bill that has to do with money or the economy has to come through my committee. And my committee also is in charge of all the bonding. So any project that happens, whether it's on the transportation side, on the general obligation side, has to come through me. And I'm now a voting member of the State Bond Commission, which gives me a seat at a big table of determining what money we spend for the taxpayers on projects everywhere across the state. So, it's a big job and it's exciting. I'm really enjoying so far getting to understand the tax code, even though it's kind of dry stuff. But really the decisions that we make when it comes to tax code dictate where the state is going to go. And I wanted to go in a better direction, and I'm going to try to do my best to make that so.
All right. So if I was to play the standard devil's advocate, most Republicans would turn around and say the state needs to have less spending. You are also going to get all this bonding. What is your mentality? Are there projects that you would put on hold? I mean, everybody's project is the most important project on the planet, right? So what is your approach to looking at bonding?
Look, I think the governor was right in 2019 in his first year in office. He had a debt diet, which a lot of people were surprised by, right? As a Democrat, that he came in and did not bond as much, certainly nowhere near as much as Malloy did. And I think that was right for 2019. We obviously are in a very different time now. And I think that if you look at some of the stimulus that came in from the federal government, I mean, I just will revert back to this. I was just in a meeting the other day, and I'm going to whip out my spreadsheet here. But, we'll see if I can actually find this, of course, now. But, I mean, we had $2.4 billion in stimulus checks here in Connecticut. $68 billion in PPP loans flowed into Connecticut. $2.8 billion on unemployment, and $1.4 billion in cities and grants. That is a ton of federal money being put into Connecticut. And obviously, if Mitch McConnell and Biden and Congress can do another round of stimulus, I think it takes the pressure off of Connecticut to bond for as much as we would. But if all signs point to a continued, cluster down there between a new president of one party, Mitch McConnell and another, and the House doing whatever the House does, you could see a scenario in which the feds may not be able to help us as much as we thought they would. So I think that we are going to have to figure out really quickly how much bonding to do, given what the feds do. But I think we have time to figure that out. And I will continue to suggest a more cautious approach to bonding. But if we don't get any support from the feds, we may have to go that route.
So it's interesting that an election, a special election in Georgia, can have a significant impact on what we do in Connecticut based on, where the Senate goes in that election. Okay. All right. So let's switch. You're sitting in an airport right now.
I am.
We got some fairly unfortunate news last week on an airline pulling out. Tell me more. Where do we stand with that, and what do we look like going forward?
Yeah, so we did get some disappointing news last week with American Airlines pulling out. Obviously, we were really grateful for the relationship that we've had for them for about 15 years. And I'm confident that if we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic, that they would still be here. And I am confident that they may still come back here. But the problem is right now, the airline industry, perhaps more than any industry in the world, except for hotels and concert venues, was really disproportionately impacted by COVID. And these folks got a big bailout in March from the CARES Act, but even that bailout was not enough to get them through the difficult time that we're in right now. And I think that they're looking at the same news that we're getting, right? The vaccine is certainly on the horizon. We may get another round of stimulus, but even with both of those things, their internal forecasts show that they won't get back to where they were until 2023 or 2024. So even with the vaccine, people are not going to be running to get on airplanes. Now, there are certainly some people who say, hey, I've been locked down for a year. I want to go to Florida. I want to go to North Carolina. I want to get out of here. And we certainly are going to account for that. But if you're the average family, or frankly, the average business who realize that you can not have to send your employees all over the country, if they can just meet with people by Zoom, they're going to save the money that they can by doing that. So I think it's going to be a while for the airline industry to come back. So that's the bad news. The good news for us is that in March, literally a week before everything turned to hell, we won a case in the United States Supreme Court that we've been fighting for 10 years to lengthen the runway that's right behind me right here. It's the biggest inhibitor to our growth. For 10 years, we've been getting very positive phone calls from airlines that say, hey, we want to come to Tweed. It's a very underserved market, but we just can't afford to fly on that short runway. If you lengthen it just even a little bit longer to 6,000 feet, we can get in and out of there. And so winning that court case really, really helps Tweed in the long run. And I think that we would have had a much different year in 2020 if that had happened and then I had the time to bring in other airlines and get the work going on that runway. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and we have to have that a little delayed. But to make a long story short, I'm confident that when the virus is under control, when that vaccine happens, and when we can get to work on that main project, you will see further activity here at Tweed, perhaps further than you've ever seen before. That's the goal.
What is holding up the actual extension of the runway?
Really just bureaucratic things that we have to sort of go through. So the first and foremost of those is that we have to get through our master plan process. That's an FAA required process that happens every 10 or 15 years to determine sort of what the next 10 or 15 years of the airport are supposed to look like. When that process wraps up in March, we will have submitted to the FAA how long of a runway we think we need to have here to be successful. If they approve it, we can, you can plane landing right there behind me. They will approve it, and we can go out and begin the environmental assessment, which will probably take a few months to determine whether we're in compliance with all the local environmental regs, which of course we want to do. And then if they get signed off from there, we can go get the permits and begin the work. And hopefully sometime in 2022, we can begin to actually extend the runway.
Right. So we're talking at least a few years before that happens.
Right. But the thing to remember, Steve, is that businesses, as you know, they're always trying to find an edge. They're always trying to find an advantage. And right now, you can land Air Force One on the 5,600 feet runway. You just have to be careful about the weight and the takeoff. And the airlines don't like that because they have to undersell their plane. But if you're an airline that sees that we're making that progress, that the shovel is about to go in the ground, they will want to come here to get the edge on another competitor. And so there'll be almost like a space race, so to speak, of companies that want to come here. And I've been talking to a lot of them that want to be the first one into the new market, and they'll undersell their plane for a year if it means that they're the first one in for 2022.
And realistically, in that airport, how many different airlines can we handle?
Well, the other part of the master plan that's very important for us is that we want to study whether or not the terminal that we have right now that you and I were talking about before we came live today is the right fit, or whether we should move it literally across the runway to East Haven. I favor that. I think we need to build a new terminal over there for two reasons. Number one, we are going to quickly outgrow our space in New Haven. And number two, we are right now situated in a residential neighborhood, whereas over there is a commercial neighborhood. And I think it makes a lot more sense, if we're going to have a lot more traffic, to build something over there that's literally right off the exit 52. It's right down Hemingway Avenue on a commercial street, and then on Proto Drive over here, which is another commercial street, to build a new terminal there that would meet our long-term needs versus the small terminal here that was literally dashed together in the 90s to accommodate the Special Olympic World Games. It was not meant to be a long-term solution, but because of that hitting runway factor, we've not been able to move forward on that. So I think that our study in the master plan is taking a very hard look at that, but I can tell you that I do think that that's probably the way to go.
Do you have any sense of East Haven would be okay with that? Would some residences, the leaders, what have you?
Yeah, so simultaneous to the master plan, I've been having some very serious conversations with elected officials and stakeholders within both East Haven and New Haven about not just these plans, but also community benefits. I think it's very important for us as an airport to be good neighbors. And there are a lot of things that people have raised that are concerns about the environment or the traffic or the noise that I am trying to make a good faith effort to address with the folks that live around here in both towns. And those conversations have sort of been simultaneously happening alongside the master plan process. And I'm hoping that we'll have some good stuff to announce on both those things pretty soon.
Okay. All right, let's switch for a second to a topic that I know you like a lot, and that's healthcare. Now, the party leadership has come out and said that this year they're going to work on a public option.
Yep.
Talk to me about that. What would that look like at a city level?
So I think it looks like three things, Steve, and here's kind of where I'm trying to go with this. The first one is we have to make the exchange more affordable. Right now, the problem is that the Access Health exchange is too expensive for most people. And for people like an average middle-class family, you're making too much money to qualify for Husky, right, which is Medicaid, but you're not making enough money to qualify for the exchange subsidies that they have. And it's sort of the biggest problem that I see with the Affordable Care Act that I would like to change. Here's the way you do it. Last year, a federal tax on insurers expired. It sunsetted. And so what several other states like New Jersey have done is they've instituted that tax on the state level. It's not going to raise taxes on taxpayers. It raises a tax on an insurance company that they were paying up until a few months ago. And with that money, you give more people subsidies to buy the exchange insurance. And so this would open up the exchange and help the exchange in two main ways. Number one, it would help more middle-class people be able to afford plans on the exchange. And number two, in theory, it would allow more people to buy into the exchange, which would make the prices for everyone on the exchange go down. And it would also incentivize other insurance carriers to offer plans on the exchange because more people could afford them. So rule number one is you stabilize the health insurance exchange. Number two is you do something called reinsurance. This is actually something I've been working with the Republicans on for 2 years. And it basically says that, let's say that you're a small business in Brantford and you have 12 employees. Your receptionist gets cancer and the bills for that person are expensive. all 11 other employees of that company are going to see a premium increase the next year because Glenda, the secretary, got cancer. What other states have done, 10 at this point, is that they do a reinsurance pool, which basically says that the state's pool of money will pay for Glenda and other really expensive other claims. They will pay for those out of this reinsurance pool so that it offsets and nobody else gets a premium increase from that. If you look at states that have done this, both red and blue states, it's saved people almost 10 to 15% on their annual premiums across the board because it takes off the biggest, most expensive claims. And the whole reason why insurance goes up in the most part is not because of average people, because most people don't go to the doctor, they don't use their insurance. It's because of those most expensive claims. If you take them off the board, it saves a lot of money. And the best part about that is that if you put some money in the game, if you put some skin in the game, let's say $20 million, the feds match that money. And so we would get $20 million from that. With $40 million, Steve, we would save 15% on every premium in the state of Connecticut. And that's my goal for thing number 2. So if we stabilize the exchange, that's great. If we help small businesses by taking off the most expensive claims, that's also great. But then there's this third problem, which is small businesses can't find affordable insurance. Nonprofits can't find affordable insurance. And so my solution to that is to open up the state employee plan and give them access to buy into the same exact healthcare that I do. Okay, well, the first question that most people say is, well, geez, that sounds like kind of a boondoggle. That sounds kind of expensive. What's the risk for taxpayers? And the answer is 0. Because what you do is you have a stop loss provision in there that basically says that if claims exceed premiums, the only people on the hook are the people who are paying those premiums, not the state taxpayers, not the state of Connecticut, not all that stuff. And so the taxpayers are protected. The last piece of this, Steve, is that you say, well, what does that mean for the insurance industry in Connecticut? And here's what it means: nothing, because they're the ones that actually administer the state employee plan. So the comptroller's office designs the plan. They say, okay, we want it to meet XYZ criteria. They put an RFP out, an insurer bids on that, and then the insurer sells it and administers it. And so it's not killing insurance jobs in the industry. It's not Medicare for all destroying insurance as we know it. It's basically just using the insurers to do what they do best, which is to sell and administer these plans, but do a plan that actually works for people and can be affordable. And I think that it's a long-winded way of saying that's the 3-pronged approach that I'm trying to take to healthcare this year.
All right, so if you open up that state employee union healthcare package and you allow people in, isn't it likely the people who are most at risk would join it?
What do you mean by that?
Well, the people who can't get insurance elsewhere because of whatever condition they have or whatever healthcare, or they're the most expensive people.
No, because we're only opening it for small businesses and nonprofits. And so It's not, individuals can't join it. I want them to go on the exchange. The exchange already exists. We shouldn't create a new program for the sake of creating a new program. That's the worst thing that government does. Look at things that are already there, see if you can make it better. And in this case, that's what I believe we can do to do that. But for small business and nonprofits, the problem is they're negotiating with major companies, but they don't have any leverage because they're negotiating with 5 or 6 or 7 employees. Where the state comptroller has leverage is he's negotiating with insurance companies on behalf of 300,000 people right now. There's 200,000 people and their families who are state employees, and there's 100,000 people in something called the partnership plan, which is municipalities that band together under the comptroller's office to buy healthcare. And so when he comes in and he's negotiating on behalf of 10% of the entire healthcare market in Connecticut, he's going to get a much better deal than if the Hornet's Nest went to Anthem and said, hey, I want to try to get small business insurance from you. And they're saying, okay, well, here's your rate. You don't really have any leverage or negotiating power. The power of leverage is in bulk. And that's what the beauty of allowing them to buy into offers.
Okay, so just from a marketing perspective here, we're calling it a public option, but it's really no new program being allowed. You're just adjusting what already exists.
It's a public option just in the sense that the government is the one that designs it and puts the RFP out, but it's not public insurance. It's just a public option.
Okay, and what are the chances are that passes?
Well, I think it's, again, we go back to the politics of realignment, right? All the things that I just said in there are things that I have worked on with Republicans. These are not Democrat ideas. This is not Bernie Sanders Medicare for all. This is not abolishing private insurance. It's common sense solutions that do cost money, but that help people afford health insurance. And that should be something that both parties agree on. And frankly, it is something that both parties campaign on. But now I'm asking people to put their money where their mouth is and actually work with me to get this done. And I'm an eternal optimist that there is always common ground to be had. And I am really appreciating the fact that I'm having those dialogues right now, and we'll see where it goes.
So from an actual cost standpoint, I'm not seeing a significant cost. Whatever we put in, we get from the federal government. But what would the cost be? What avenue of that would actually cost more money?
It doesn't. I mean, the public option doesn't cost more money for this reason. Number one, there's that stop loss provision to protect the taxpayers. So if does, for some reason, let's say that it is a failure, and it means, the CBIA was very clear to say they think this is going to be a boondoggle. Well, if it's a failure, the state is not on the hook for that. Taxpayers are not on the hook for that. The only people that are on the hook for that are the premium holders. And if the premium it goes up to a point that they can't afford, they'll leave, and the program will fail. And we could say we tried and it didn't work out. And nobody will have been on the hook for that in the long term, except the people who voluntarily signed up for it in the first place, right?
Okay.
It doesn't cost the state any more money to design that plan because the comptroller is already designing it for people like myself that already have the plan. So that doesn't cost any more money. And the first two programs that I suggested to you, that does cost money, but again, you're not taxing individuals for that. You're just reinstating a tax that already existed, but just sunsetted on the insurers. And they can't credibly say, well, I'm going to raise premiums now because of that, because they've been paying the tax the whole time. It's not a new tax. It's just reinstating a tax. And so I really have worked very hard to come up with a very revenue neutral plan. And I think that we've found it. Is it perfect? No. Am I open to compromising further? Absolutely. And even though that I am the finance chairman of the committee, I have fortunately been I will continue working on this on behalf of our caucus, even though I'm not the chair of the insurance committee anymore.
Do you find it unlikely that the federal government will reinstitute that tax?
I do, yeah, because I think what's mostly, I mean, if I had a crystal ball, which I wish I did because I would be able to live my life better, I think they're going to lose the two Georgia seats. Maybe we win one of them. But I don't think the Democrats are going to win both of them. So I think there's a very high statistical likelihood that Joe Biden is president, the Republicans control the Senate, and the Democrats control the House. I supported Joe Biden from day one because I do believe he's an old soul in politics like myself, who still believes in sort of rolling up your sleeves, having a beer or a cup of coffee and trying to figure out things without the partisan BS that so consumes politics today. And the central premise of his ideology is going to be tested in the next month or so, because we're going to really see whether he can get Mitch McConnell to come up with a deal on this and everything else. But even if he gets McConnell to cut a deal on COVID or prescription drugs, he's never going to get the Mitch McConnell Senate to vote on new taxes on insurers, certainly not on a public option in DC. It's going to be small ball changes. And so I think it's really going to fall to us in Connecticut to do this kind of stuff. And that's why I'm working on what I'm working on.
Okay, a question from one of the readers. We know the new family leave tax starts in January on payroll. How will you keep the new family leave tax from going into the general fund?
It's already in a separate fund.
Okay. How will you pay for healthcare? We've talked about that. Do you see revitalization of homes in East Haven? I guess they're talking about the airport.
Yeah, so for the last 5 years, we have helped about 160 homeowners that are in the general periphery of the airport for either if they, in 2015, the FAA came in and they did a study of noise contours in this area. And if you registered a decibel level of a certain decibel, you were eligible for our home program. And that helped people put all new windows and all new HVAC in their house, which made their house a lot quieter from the noise of the planes above. Our satisfaction rate with that program is in the 90 percentile, which is pretty good. It's definitely improved the quality of life. The problem with the program is that it's very sporadic. And so it's based on science that's way above my head and certainly way above yours. And the problem is that on one street, Mrs. O'Brien might be eligible for the program, but Mrs. Smith next door is not. And it drives people absolutely crazy because they can't understand how one house and the other is not at the same decibel level. And so one of the things that I have talked about with folks is there a way to do what's called block rounding, which basically says that everyone on a certain block that's gotten the program so far could then get the benefit. It's something that I think we're exploring, and it's, again, part of those conversations that we're having about community benefits that I'm all for and think is very important. So if that's the revitalization that you're talking about, that's what we're working on.
All right, so one quick question that you knew was coming from me. Is sports betting going to pass anytime soon?
Yes. If I have anything to say about it, I think it will. I mean, listen, this fall, I saw some ridiculous numbers coming out of Jersey and Pennsylvania in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue.
More than Vegas. Jersey was more than Vegas.
And it's so crazy because, especially with COVID, people are home and they have nothing to do except pick up their phone, they're watching a game, and they want to place that bet. And so, the problem, as you know, is the tribes. The tribes have exclusivity on gaming in Connecticut. In exchange for that exclusivity, they give us 25% of all their slot revenue. That's not an insignificant sum of money. It's about $300 million a year. And so, the challenge that we face and the challenge that I'm going to step into in a little bit when I take office in January is, can we find a deal with them to continue giving them quote unquote exclusivity when it comes to actual casino gambling, but also open the door to other people to offer sports betting. And again, like everything else, I think there's always a compromise that can be found. Nobody's been able to find it for a couple of years. I'm going to give it my damnedest shot in January, and we'll see if we can do it. But I am a very strong proponent of sports gambling. I think it's something that really could help us out. And frankly, that could be very helpful in terms of my first goal, which I talked to you about, which is rebalancing our tax code. It's not very easy to jigger around the tax code as it stands right now because somebody's got to take from someone to give to somebody else. If I get a whole new pot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, obviously we have some spending needs that we need to do with that, but it can also help me rejigger and make our tax code fair. And if I can do that, I would love to do it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good for now. I appreciate it if we keep these lines open, if we only have back on when the session starts and answer some more questions for us. But again, congratulations. That's a big assignment. And so you've got a lot of power for our district. And I'm actually not in your district. I'm pretty well impacted by it. And congratulations on that. And good luck with the second season of Yellowstone.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
John, thanks.
Talk to you.
Okay. So thanks, Sean, for coming on. I think he answered quite a few questions. Interesting about East Haven, moving that terminal over. As I said, as people know, I talked on Tuesday. I actually worked in that terminal for a while when Piedmont was there years ago, and that's would be a significant move. I don't know. I know some people who live there. I don't know what their response would be to that, but that would be interesting to see and discuss in the future. I know some people sent some questions in. I hope we were able to get most of those in to answer some of those things. And I also appreciate Sean coming on. He is incredibly powerful representative now, and that's good for our district. And as you can see, to those that may not agree with him or a different party, what have you, the guy answers questions. And that's why I often speak positively of him. I may not agree with everything. I don't agree with him on legalization of marijuana, for example. I'm all for it. But he answers questions, he takes questions, and that's what we can ask from our elected officials. So we'll do a better job of getting more elected officials on, asking them some questions, talking about these issues going forward. And I'd like to know, if you're from East Haven or in the East Haven area, what your thoughts would be on moving that terminal over and where we should go from there. But guys, it is 4:34. It's been a half hour. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the questions. As always, if you can, share this with your friends, recommend it to others as we can get readership and listenership up. And I appreciate all the support that's been coming in. Have a great weekend. We'll be back again on Monday. Yeah, I know I apologize. I canceled 2 this week as other things came up, but I plan on being back on Monday. And I hope you all have a phenomenal night. Have a great weekend. I'll see you then.